All good, Jim? Good. Welcome, everybody, to the October Board of Finance for the Town of Fairfield's meeting. I'm going to ask Mr. DeWitt to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We're down a few people this evening because of some business conflicts for the most part. Actually, I know for a fact in 3 of the instances, and we're expecting the 2 others to be here momentarily. The agenda tonight: to hear and discuss golf rates being set by the Golf Commission for next season. Number 2, to hear and consider and act upon a bond resolution for $3 million to be increased by $7.5 million related to the WPCA. And then to hear and consider and act on the CFO to approve transfers. And then a discussion of the building department revenue budget. The discussion on current vacancies in town. And to hear a report on solid waste and recycling department contractor issue. Compactor, did I say contractor? Compactor, thank you. And then to hear, consider, and act upon any other communication, and then a status report from town attorneys on Julian legal issues and fill use issues. I'm going to take this a bit out of order if nobody has a problem with that, so we can hear our reports, and then we can go on to voting items when we have a quorum here. So I'm going to call up item number 1, to hear and discuss golf rates being set by the Golf Commission for next season. Welcome, gentlemen. This should be a short report from what you were telling me earlier. So go ahead, Mr. Calabrese.
Good evening, Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks. Sorry, Jared.
Thank you.
Testing, there we go. Good evening, Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation, and I've got our golf chairman, Ryan Scully, with me as well.
Mr. Scully, thanks for coming out tonight.
We just wanted to follow up in the spring during the budget process. Your board had asked us to come to you guys before our golf commission set our rates for the 2020 season. So we are
Actually,
here.
for each season.
For
right?
each,
Yeah.
we'll do it for each season, starting with the 2020 season here. The report is very simple, short and sweet. As we said in the spring, we don't plan on increasing our rates or changing our rates in any fashion for this upcoming season during the construction season. So everything is staying status quo, but we're happy to take any questions you guys might have.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we got a report, a revenue variance report at our last meeting, and they specifically referenced sort of a decrease in revenue related to Smith Richardson with ID card sales. It's described as a slowdown in ID sales, and then also with the driving range, I guess fewer people were going to the driving range. So can you tell us, the rates are going to stay the same, but are you concerned that you didn't make the revenue you projected last year? I know you're adjusting the budget. I understand that, but should we be looking at these rates if we're not getting enough golfers there?
We, as from the recreation department side of things, we're not concerned with the rates. Last year, our decline in revenue was solely due mainly to weather. Our greens fees were down almost $100,000. Well, probably $80,000. Our ID cards were down another, I think, 300 cards, if I'm not mistaken. But that's been the trend over the last 10 years. It has decreased by almost 300 every year for the past 10 years. The break-even point is about 3 rounds right now. So if you buy the $70 ID card to get the resident rates, if you play 3 times, it makes it worth buying that pass. When the pass was a little cheaper, it was at $25 at one point, and I believe it went to $35, and then to $50, and then to the $70. Over the past 10 years, that's what the rates have been. And it has declined, but you end up, it's hard to capture, but you end up picking up non-resident rounds because people aren't buying the resident ID. So if you went and played once up at the course and you didn't have a resident ID, you would pay a non-resident rate. So the non-resident rates and our resident rounds and non-resident rounds, for the most part, resident rounds have stayed static. Non-resident rounds are the ones we want to increase because those are the guys that are subsidizing our residents for playing. So overall, we haven't been overly concerned with the decline because our rounds have stayed roughly the same.
I guess my question is for the residents of this town, and those are our taxpayers, those are the people I'm concerned about. Have you heard scuttlebutt that the price for that ID card is not, is just out of people's reach?
No, we haven't. And our resident rates per round are probably middle of the pack compared to the surrounding towns. We compare them to probably another 8 to 10 courses in the area. Again, middle of the pack is where our rates fall. We're not at the high end, we're not at the low end. It's pretty much right down the middle.
Yeah, when we looked at this, actually preparing for this meeting, I asked Anthony to pull the numbers for the golf ID for the last 10 years, and it's kind of crazy because it pretty much drops the same amount of numbers since 2011 through 2019, regardless of what the price of the ID is. It just keeps declining. I don't know if that's just the nature of golf or, you know, the clubs in town, 3 private clubs in town. Also, you know, Tiger Woods is not Tiger Woods like he was in 2009. So that's the way that it's kind of gone. And it really is reflected in the adult resident ID. The senior one pretty much stays, and the junior one pretty much stays the same. It's the adult one that kind of decreases a little bit, yeah. It's kind of weird. I don't even know why. I wish I could explain it.
Go ahead, Mrs. Desmond.
So it may be that someone who isn't even playing 3 rounds is just saying, I'm paying $75 for 1 round of golf. But those who are playing at least 3 or more are not dropping out.
Doesn't appear so, based on our resident round staying pretty much the same.
Mr. Walsh?
So your rates in the last 10 years have gone from $25 for this card up to $75. So you've had it
70.
70. So close to a 200% increase
Yes.
in that period of time. What do you think, Anthony? This is not a golf question. Say we took the beach pass.
Yep.
We raised that by 200%. Think that would have an effect on the number of sales of beach passes?
I do.
Yeah, you would, right? Yeah. So why wouldn't you try to like bring it down by $25 and see what happened? I mean, are you guys trying to not have residents play at the resident rate, and you'd prefer the residents of the town to pay at the out-of-town rate because you make more money? Is that what?
No.
I'm getting confused about what you're trying to sell.
It's the break-even point. That's you know, that's what we've always looked at. That's what the commission has always looked at historically. One of the reasons why the golf ID has gone up over the last 10 years is because the rates have gone up over the last 10 years. So when the rates move up, eventually we move the golf ID to keep it at a 3-round break even. That's sort of there's actually no rhyme or reason to that. That's just something that the commission has always done, is try to say, we want to make you have 3 rounds to break even, to make it worth buying. That's sort of the historical thing they've done. So, you know, 10 years ago, the rate for the weekend to play was, you know, $18. Now it's $29.
Mm-hmm.
So as the rates for the rounds go up, then we move the golf ID accordingly. That's what the course has always done historically. But that's not to say we couldn't look at lowering it.
Do you do the same thing, Anthony, for the beach passes? Do you go for this break even, this whole calculation
No,
that the commission's talking about?
Beach passes are a completely different animal.
Why is that?
Well, beach passes, we don't calculate how many times someone goes to the beach, nor do we calculate how many times they go to the transfer station, because it's the same sticker. So no, we don't calculate it, but I mean, you could also get a Penfield-only sticker that's free if you didn't want to go to the beach or
Or the dump.
correct.
Yeah.
So you don't have that option here as a resident. You don't get to go to the golf course for free. If you want to pay resident rates, you get the ID that proves you're a resident. And again, the break even for that's 3 times. So you just know you need to play 3 rounds to make your money.
But it seems as though this golf cart situation is kind of broken at this point in time. You say it's like you've lost
Well,
300? How many
but-
people did you lose from last year to this year?
300 or so.
And then the year before it was another 300?
Correct.
And then the year before was another 300?
That's correct. We were at 4,000, we're down to about 3,000 now.
Okay.
But,
So,
And that's regardless of price.
but the resident round, I think the key to realize here, the resident rounds are staying the same, right? So if we do 20,000, I apologize, this is not a real
Right, you're
number.
making it up.
If we do 20,000 resident rounds every year, we don't know if that 20,000 is actually, 4,000 people playing, or it's the same 3,000 people that have the IDs. I don't know how many times they're playing. You could be up there, 40 times playing and getting your money's worth of it,
wish I had the time.
right?
To do that.
People
But
that
the,
play a
but the people that we really need to play the course are the non-residents. The non-residents are paying double what a resident pays. So it's the non-residents that are subsidizing and keeping our rates low as residents. So that's the key. I'm not overly concerned about how many resident IDs we sell. Would I like to sell more? Sure, but
You would be more concerned if you were seeing the number of rounds of
Decrease.
residents go down.
correct.
Okay, but what is your goal? Is your goal to increase the number of rounds that are played there? Or are you guys perfectly happy with what the level of play is there right now? Are you completely happy with that? Right now, you're completely happy with where we are right now?
40,000 rounds is where we should be, correct. Yes, that's our goal.
It's not a volume issue, is what you're saying.
Correct. Anything over that, you start getting 45, 50,000 rounds there, pace of play gets affected, it's slower rounds, people aren't happy,
Maintenance.
wear and tear on the course. So right now, the 40,000 rounds is where our maintenance staff is telling us this is the ideal spot to be. Golf Trends are telling us that's where you guys should be for our course. That's where we've always strived to be, right around the 40,000. And depending on the weather, we're anywhere from 36 to almost 44,000 per year.
How many passes, I don't have the numbers here in front of me, how many cards were issued this year?
3,040.
3,040? So we're about on our current trend, about 10 years from being out of business on the card business at 300. You've had 3 straight losses of 300.
Well, this year it didn't go down 300, but it only went down about 100. So, but I don't know. I mean, it has gone down every year since 2009. So, and that's just a fact.
Okay.
But there's also a lot of courses that don't use this business model and IDs at all. I mean, you could take the ID away completely. You could say you show your license and you are a Fairfield resident. Granted, now you're losing that $70 per head for 3,000 people that you get up front. That's something the Golf Commission could look at.
Yeah, sure.
We also have season passes that we can get rid of. There's only about 300 or so of those that get sold every year, and those go for anywhere between $150 to $500 for residents. And again, that gets them an even lower rate than what a resident rate is. So there's different ways to look at it, but under the current model that we're using, again, our rounds are very consistent. So that's why we haven't been overly concerned at the commission level with the rate.
The rounds have been very consistent in 2 ways, right? The total number of rounds and the number of rounds that residents are playing. Is that fair to say?
Correct, that's fair.
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah.
So I understand about the rounds, the driving range also. Are you getting fewer people? It's all weather related,
It's all
I'm hearing you're
weather-related,
saying?
yeah.
So
So-
if I was to compare this past year to the prior year, where would we have been in terms of number of people who use the driving range?
Fairly even.
Fairly even. Was that also weather related?
Yeah, the last 2 years have been wet.
This year will be good.
So maybe go back 3 years. Would we have seen a drastic increase in the number of people using the
Yes.
driving range?
Yes.
My guess is when you guys see the numbers for this year, they'll be really good because we had a great summer.
You're also well over budget on fees, right?
Correct.
Anything else? Great. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
All right, we can do item number 2. Thank you, gentlemen, for getting here expeditiously. To hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Resolved that a bond resolution entitled, "A Resolution Amending and Restating a Resolution Entitled, A Resolution Appropriating $3,088,000 for the costs associated with the constructions of a berm and a pump station, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. To increase the amount of that appropriation and bond authorization to $7,419,265. Be and hereby is adopted, and the town agrees to pay only the $385,000 previously agreed to as part of this appropriation. Can I have a motion to put that before us? Mr. DeWitt, do I have a second? We'll take Mrs. Marmion. The item is now before us. Who's here to speak to it? Mr. Carey. Thank you. We spoke a bit about this a few weeks back. When this first came to our attention, why don't you update us on what's gone on since?
So this was approved through the WPCA in late August, and then I came in front of you just to give you a little bit of a background on the projects that WPCA has in front of it. This one has been pending for almost 18 months, and basically we met with the contractor, looked at the budget, looked at how it was put together, because there was some value engineering that the town did with the contractor to try to get the cost of the overall cost of the project down. Some things were taken out of the budget. We looked at it again and said that didn't make sense. Some of it was ad alternates were put back in because of change on the ground. And basically, I believe you have the budget in front of you for the total.
Questions, comments, concerns on this item? We'll go to Mr. DeWitt. Thank you, Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've got a couple pieces of paper. We've got a resolution. But there's a document. It's called Wastewater Treatment Plant Hardening. So just so I'm clear, and I remember we went through this, I think it was literally last week. So the $3,088,000 is now $7.419 million. But more importantly, the town share, which was $772,000, is now gone up to almost $4.1 million.
No.
May I?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor,
What
please.
you have there is the backup that went to the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
That was based upon a request, as you see that on the far right-hand side there in bold. What the Board of Selectmen voted, and that's what the supplemental resolution is to address here. The Board of Selectmen voted to keep the town's share limited to $385,000, which is what was agreed to in the original resolution, and the remaining piece will be allocated from the WPCA. So the
Got it. Okay, so this was
the general
just-
fund is $384,000.
Which stays constant, correct?
Okay, great. So that, thank you for the backup. That wasn't clear. So,
Yeah,
so
no.
we're really only on the hook for, so this is 386, but it's 385 in this resolution, right? Is that the right
Yeah,
number?
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
Yeah.
That
Mr.
clears it
McCullough.
up. But is that in the bond somewhere?
So I guess my question is, I understand what you just said, but this berm is also meant to protect the animal control facility, the fire training center. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if I'm understanding this proposal, the vast funding for this is coming from the WPCA. They're going to be paying off this bond, correct? Right?
That is correct, but there's also $3.3 million in federal grants for the project.
Okay, all right. I guess my only, and maybe you've answered that question, my only concern was the town's paying $385, WPCA's funding a big chunk of this, but a lot of it's coming through grant monies.
So
That was the concern I had.
unfortunately, between the time I took over and just previous, the numbers were still changing based on grants that were being received by the state and then basically given to us. I believe we talked about that last time with the CDBG DR funding coming in at another $1 million. But there was things that were not included in the budget that we needed to add in, which is where the costs increased.
Yeah, that's not, but what John is not what John is addressing is, there's 3 facilities there that are being protected, and the payment ratio is like 9 to 1, it's like, or not 9 to 1, maybe 8 to 1.
Why is it?
385,000 to 2.7 million.
It seems like the WPCA is
So
subsidizing.
what you were trying to raise up,
Animal control to protect
yeah,
that,
this
too.
was
That's
important
what it
enough
is.
to the WPCA that they're willing to do that. But, I mean, obviously, if you want to do an allocation, like, what's the value of each of the 3 units, and you could allocate it based upon the asset value of the 3 facilities, if you wanted to.
Well, but then you get into who pays for the fire training center, and the second thing is 50% of this is a federal grant, right?
The other thing
I'm
too.
talking about but the total
Everything
cost of
minus.
the town is 3.3.
Right.
So
Right. So you're saying split that 3 ways if you're going to do
you
it.
could, I mean, or you could, yeah.
The nature of the facility too,
$700,000.
it would be very hard to just protect the plant because the clarifiers are actually separated from the plant across Richard White Way. And you would literally have to build a wall through basically the center of the fire training.
Right, basically, it's collateral that's protected, because in order to protect the
Correct.
WPCA piece, you got to protect all of them because they all share the land anyway.
That's right, and once it goes back in behind conservation and the dog pound, they're actually tying the berm into the grade of the green waste facility and then cutting back across the road.
They're not really subsidizing.
Mrs. Marmion?
So can you just quickly walk us through, I know things have changed, there's, a significant increase in the cost. You're going from 1 pump to 2, is that correct? And what, is that because there's a greater need that was discovered?
So in attempts to value engineer the program, they were looking at buying pumps outside of the contract. The idea was to go outside and get pumps that were not stationary. They could be moved depending on need. But we actually went back to the DEP and they said, no, that's not an option. You need stationary pump houses to be put in there. So that was something that, we were value engineering it out of the project, but that was not something that would have been allowed. So that cost was added back in. And then there was a cost for the paving was actually taken out of the project to be done by the town, which we can do. We plan on doing the paving in-house, but that money wasn't really budgeted as part of the bond resolution or request at that time. So I would have had to come back and ask for it in my operating budget, or whoever takes the position to ask for that in the operating budget. And that's just, I can't do the project that way. It's very hard to have all those timing in place if, for whatever reason, I'm ready to pave in May and there's no money in there. Just doesn't work. So we carried that back in. And then there were some alternates, and then the cost of the contingency. We felt that raising that to 20% was more realistic for a project of this size. And then there was the contract management. So all those pieces, kind of putting it back in, were with consideration from both the town engineers and the designer from Time Bond. And actually, before we put this final numbers, went back to the contractor and said, is this realistic? And they said, yes, absolutely. Because again, this project has to be, the grant funds have to be expended by September 2020. Project doesn't need to be completed, but we need to be, we need to have all of the grant funds allocated.
Did the cost of building the berm also go up because of not being able to use fill pile material?
So
So
there was
what
a-
was
there-
the
there was a-
percentage that went up?
So it's $681,000 is the alternate for that additional work. It just, with the time frame of the contract, not saying that material, and we talked about this last time, not saying that material couldn't be used, but it'd have to be pre-qualified, and that would be its own timing issue, and just, it would be very hard. I mean, we'd be running two major kind of operations to make sure that the fill material that is going into the flood control berm meets the requirements to do that. And that would be residential standards because it's in a flood zone. And in order to, it's not solid waste capping, which is what the other berm was built out of, up on the landfill outside of the floodplain, but in the floodplain. So it would be very challenging and would require a redesign of the actual dike.
So just on that cost, the contingency at 20% is higher than we normally see. What's your rationale for having 20%?
So most projects are between 10 and 20%. 20% isn't out of hand for a contract of this size. There's a lot of things that I can't anticipate when they're doing the sheet piling, if the geotechnical, if it's taking longer. 20, we're planning on 20% because there probably are some unknowns that we'll run into. But again, that's a very conservative number. And again, talking with the contractor and the designer of the project, they feel that's reasonable.
One minor, the original numbers did have, the board, if you may recall, asked me to go through the minutes, see what was said at WPCA. And one of the things, the original does have money in there for fill, but they were going to use partially fill from the pile, not all the fill from the pile. Mr. Carey's using all the fill from the pile, so the difference is like 600. It's not 682. That's the total. The difference is like 300,000 or 250,000 or something like that.
We're paying $250,000 more for
Yeah,
fill we know is clean.
because we're not using any from the pile.
Right.
We're not using any of our fill. We're using.
Yes, that's the decision that Mr. Carey
Yeah,
made, as he just
no, I think
explained.
it's a wise decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Walsh, did you have anything?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting point is, I guess, is what the split out should be. Just because WPCA wants to get this thing done, but there's protection of town assets, other town assets. To me, it seems like the town should be taking a bigger percentage of the amount that they should be paying. WPCA is going to be challenged on a number of levels, some of which Mr. Carey detailed in the overages the last meeting, to the tune of, I thought it was, we're going to be having to pay on those projects $13 million. And they're going to be taking that hit. They're also going to be taking a hit of us having to do the WPCA facility over again. There's people complaining the bills that we received from WPCA all over social media about how high they believe they've gone. Adding this extra amount is, I don't see how you can make that argument that we're protecting town properties by having WPCA people pay it as opposed to the entire town.
Well, let's dive into that just a little bit.
Yep.
There's two things come to mind on that. I'm just taking the opposite view for purposes of discussion. All right. Number one, is this something that we would have done if it wasn't for WPCA? In other words, would we have expended those funds to build this if you didn't need to do it for this particular facility?
Probably not.
So we wouldn't have protected or spent $7 million to protect the animal control facility and the firehouse, the fire training center. We wouldn't have spent those funds independent of this. This was basically being spent because of the WPCA facility.
The town would not have gone out and built a flood control dike around just those facilities independently of the plant. The plant's your largest capital asset in town, and saltwater and electricity and pumps are not, they don't go well together.
And then going back and looking at the second part of your commentary just a couple of minutes ago, there was no way to reasonably do this without protecting the other assets. You couldn't break this apart. So it's not like you could say, let's just protect this and not these other assets.
It would
And
be
it-
very hard to do that. Anything can be engineered, but what would be, the additional cost is,
Right. My point just being that if it was a business, if you're going to put a security system in to protect your house, and it so happens that in protecting your house, you have to protect my house for whatever reason, if I wasn't going to do it, should I have to pay for it? Or should you pay for it because it's your decision in your house? That's what this comes down to, in my opinion, under that scenario.
To me, this has always been sold as a protection of all of these assets, every time it's ever come up at any of these meetings.
I'm just
It's
asking.
always been sold as protecting all of these, and it even came up at the beginning of this meeting. And I don't see why we wouldn't break it out, but that's my own personal preference in regards to it. I think that the people who pay WPCA fees would have a beef to hear that their rates are going up because this is going on. And I just have an issue with it.
Anybody else? Yeah, Mr. Mottola?
Does this berm protect any private property in the area? Will it have a benefit to?
No.
No, okay, thanks.
So the cheapest part of the construction process is actually the earthen berm, and that's the area that's directly behind conservation and the dog pound. And the sheet pile, the reason why when the design started it got more expensive is because the dike takes up a large footprint. But the sheet pile can be driven vertically, and you can basically get it up right adjacent to the tidal wetlands. When we started looking at the design of the berm, it was pushing out a lot onto, the upland WPCA and surrounding properties, but also causing issues going into the tidal wetlands. So the only area that could really be done economically without impacting tidal wetlands was actually behind conservation and the
Got
dog
it.
pound.
All right. Any other questions, comments? There's a.
Mr. Carey, is there a power grid? What's this thing with the power grid
Yeah,
down
so
there
that's
that was
the-
installed?
So there's a microgrid. It's
Yeah, the microgrid.
about 50% completed, and basically that will run all of those facilities if it loses power down there. So the microgrid will click on and basically run all of those, the conservation department, fire department. So we'll have that as swing space during a storm. So we could actually put assets in the flood dike prior to a storm, because Public Works
That's interesting.
potentially would flood.
Mhm.
So you could move assets into the dike and then have all of that run off of the microgrid.
Okay, that microgrid, does it benefit the police department?
They have their own separate microgrid between the firehouse and police department.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, if the town loses power on a, area-wide type of issue, those will come up
First.
and then power all of those facilities that they run off.
I remember when we did that.
We might not be able to get the trucks out of Richard White Way down to Reef Road, but they should be high and dry, sitting in the WPCA parking lot or fire training center parking lot.
Okay.
Anybody else? Let's, can we turn our attention to the bond resolution itself? Mr. Mayor, you passed out a supplemental resolution. I know we have bond counsel here tonight. Can you step us through what you're trying to do and why this doesn't have to go back to the Board of Selectmen? Should we do it like this?
Yeah, basically, the
Please, yeah, speak into the microphone, thank you.
the bond resolution is the same bond resolution that was passed by the Board of Selectmen. The bond resolution basically says the town is going to issue bonds up to $7.4 million for the purposes. We probably will not issue bonds ever to that amount, but that's what it allows us to do, depending on the financing and the cash flow. So the bond, the Board of Selectmen, when they passed that resolution, also indicated in the same resolution to limit the funding to $385,000. In talking with John Straffson and Frank Cleary and Mike Andrea.
Speak up, please.
Is this not doing well?
I don't know, I can barely, it sounds mumbled, garbled.
Anyway, I think I had it too low. Yeah, thanks. Basically, for the purposes of the sale, when we go out with the actual bonds, By having the 385 included in the same resolution would really technically only allow the town to bond up to 385. So this is so the supplemental resolution, which we have before you, which is drafted by the attorneys, separates the 385 from the bond resolution. It was never in the bond resolution itself, the bond authorization, but it was in their motion. So this makes it clear that the town can actually, is authorized to spend and to bond the 7. Based upon conversations with the bond council, we concluded that since it doesn't really need it, we could take it back to the Board of Selectmen, the supplemental resolution if we wanted to, but not necessary. And here's Mike Andrea.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. Please go right ahead on, so this supplemental resolution is just a further clarification of what was passed by the Board of Selectmen.
Exactly. And just for additional point of information, the bond resolution, when the town goes to issue bonds for this project, one of our jobs as bond counsel is to give an opinion that everything has been authorized properly and that the town has the authorization to repay the debt. So that's why we like to keep the bond authorizations as clean as possible. So what we did was created this supplemental resolution, which was really kind of the town's own internal accounting as how it would be repaid. From an investor standpoint, the town is on the hook for the full amount, but what you do internally is up to you guys and is really covered by this supplemental resolution.
Does anybody have any questions on this? Mr. DeWitt?
So by us voting this forward today, it'll automatically attach this resolution to the existing bond that was approved by the Board of Selectmen?
The way I would suggest doing it is to have two separate votes.
Yep.
One on the bond authorization and then the second one on the supplemental resolution.
And that's what I'm going to do. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to read the supplemental resolution, but I'm going to, I would take two separate votes. Anybody?
And then they'll, after two votes, though, they'll be considered a
Well, it goes to the RTM.
No, I think it would go to the RTM as
Separate.
two separate ones
Okay.
as well.
Yeah,
And,
okay.
and, you know, and I had discussions with Mr. Mayor about this, but it was obviously the intent of the Board of Selectmen to do this. It wouldn't be the way we would have done it. We would have preferred to have two separate resolutions, but when you read the minutes and everything, that was their intent, was to approve the full amount and just be clear that really the town, as far as the internal allocation between WPCA and the town, was going to be the 385.
Mr. Tetro is here. Is that your understanding as well, sir, since you're here? He's shaking his head affirmatively. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read both of these and ask for two separate votes, okay? As the item is already before us. Resolved that a bond resolution entitled "A Resolution Amending and Restating a Resolution Entitled A Resolution Appropriating $3,088,000 for the costs associated with constructions of a berm and pumping station and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation, to increase the amount of the appropriation and bond authorization to $7,419,265, be and hereby is adopted by the town, and the town agrees to pay only the $385,000 previously agreed to as part of this appropriation. All in favor of this aspect of this resolution? Okay, opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Walsh is opposed.
I'd like the minutes to reflect that I'm in favor of the project. I'm just not in favor of the way that the amounts were split up in regards to the responsibility by the WPCA versus what the town was responsible for, the $385,000.
Thank you. So noted. Can you make sure that in the minutes? Now I'm going to read the supplemental resolution.
Yeah, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just a point. Mr. Walsh's abstention might be better served in this resolution.
Oh, yeah,
as opposed
'cause
to the
I was
first
just
one.
going to say.
The first one just authorizes the funds.
Yeah, that's
The
for your own
385 is not
consideration.
mentioned in what we're
Yeah,
voting
that's
on
But he
right
can
now.
do it.
Well, it does mention what the total amount of the bond is, and I don't believe
Correct.
that that's what the total amount of the bond should be. I think it should be less for the WPCA, because I think the town should be picking up a larger
No,
percentage.
The bond is a full faith and credit of the town.
Right.
though.
Right.
Right.
The authorization is for the full amount, it doesn't address who's paying what
Correct.
portion.
The next one
But
addresses.
the
All
next
right,
one
I'll
doesn't.
withdraw I'll abstain on this one.
Fair enough. Or you can vote negative against both of them.
No, I'll abstain on this vote.
Okay.
And the reason for my abstention is as noted, as I mentioned.
Fair enough. The supplemental resolution, whereas the town of Fairfield has adopted at the request of the Water Pollution Control Authority, a resolution entitled, a resolution amending and restating a resolution entitled, a resolution appropriating $3,088,000 for the costs associated with construction of a berm and pumping station, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation to increase the amount of the appropriation and bond authorization to $7,419,265, the amended resolution. And whereas the amended resolution appropriated $7,419,265 for costs associated with the construction of a berm and pumping station to protect the Fairfield wastewater treatment plant, the animal control facility, the fire training center, and the conservation department workshop, and authorizing issuance of bonds. And whereas, while the town is liable for the debt service on the bonds, for internal accounting purposes, it is appropriated that the cost of the project, including debt service on the bonds, be allocated between the general fund and the funds of the Water Pollution Control Authority. And whereas the town's Water Pollution Control Authority has agreed to pay for the cost of the project not paid from the grant proceeds. And whereas the town has determined that is appropriate that $385,000 of the cost to be paid from the town's general fund. Now, therefore, it is resolved that all costs of the projects not paid from grants proceeds shall be paid from the funds of the authority except for $385,000 of the costs, which shall be paid from the town's general fund. Whew. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Walsh is opposed.
I'd like the
And-
minutes to once again reflect that I'm in support of the project. It's just that the financing of it, and specifically the town's portion of the cost, based on the town assets that are being protected, is too low, and the WPCA account holders that are paying the WPCA fees is going to be too high.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh, and that should be noted.
Is that a nay, or are you still?
No, it was a no on that. Thank you.
All right, so it was an abstain and a no. All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Item number 3, to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the CFO to approve transfers as of June 30th,
Oh, you're still here, that's right.
2019. This came up at last meeting. We asked for a clarification on the accounting of how best to do this and be able to control the funds. So, Mr. Mayor, step us through what we talked about last meeting and then step us through your proposal here tonight, please.
The handout shows that,
There's something wrong with that mic
yeah,
again, I
there's,
think.
the now? Okay, the handout, two parts to cover potential remediation cost requirements, which transfers out. Hello? Oh, whoa, good, thanks. So the top part is, recommends 800,000 transferred out to non-recurring, capital non-recurring now, and transfers 1 million into debt service. The future reserve for future uses transfers 2,700,000 into transfers out for debt service. The 800,000 would be available as soon as it's passed, if it were to be passed by this body and the RTM. The 1 million and the 2.7 million would have to be voted out of transfers for debt service to be spent.
And this is all related to, we're putting these funds aside largely for the fill pile.
Well, the 1.8 is definitely largely for the fill pile. The 2.7 would be my recommendation regardless.
To put it off and see if we need it as we move forward.
Yeah, to mitigate future issues and
And-
have a reserve.
And did you get clarification that in order to move anything other than the 800,000, which we're allowing for right now, it has to come back before this body in order to be expended?
Yes.
Okay, so the 800,000 is available to be expended because it's going to capital non-recurring. The 1 million and the 2.7 million would sit basically to the side, and in order to be expended related to the fill pile or anything else would have to come back before this body.
Yes.
In addition, because you're increasing revenue projections, because we did better on revenue this year, that has to go to the RTM for approval, is that correct?
The second one does, yes.
The second one, which is the increase in the change in market value, the building permit revenue and the pilot revenue. How does that only have to go before them, considering there's no offset to that?
Well, it's an increase in the budget because you're increasing the budget by $2 million.
Because of those amounts?
Right.
It's actually 2.7 million.
Well, it's 2 yes, I'm sorry, 2.7.
Right. Yes, you absolutely can.
This is money that is from the FY19 budget.
Correct.
So how are we,
Not from the budget, from the results.
right, but I'm
Yeah.
saying from that.
Yes.
Not the
From that
budget we're
period.
currently executing.
Correct.
The budget we've already executed and finished on
Correct.
June 31st. June
Right.
30th.
Instead of dropping to the general, to the fund balance, it's going into the capital non-recurring and into the debt service
So how are we
fund.
changing the budget when you say it's changing the budget?
Well, because the change in the market, in the revenue, increases the budget, whereas the upper one just transfers between expense accounts, overages and underages. But the second one actually increases the revenue and increases the expense. So you're increasing the budget.
On a budget we've already executed?
Yes, sir. That's what we do with the transfers.
We do it every year.
Do it every year, but normally we haven't done it with revenue, but with revenue, it's actually increasing the full budget.
And the account, no, whatever we're calling that account, I don't want to get into that discussion again, right? That $1 million that, if we vote it forward, that if the RTM votes the 2.7, that will go into that same account in the 1 million, which would have to come to us?
Right, those funds, we've done that in the past, those funds have never been spent without approval of this body.
Got it, thank you.
Because we're touching revenue and increasing the budget, it's got to go to the RTM.
Got it, okay.
The only other comment I'd make is, I ran the numbers on the fund balance percentages.
Yeah.
If you remember, originally, we were talking 1.5 and 3.0. If you wanted to make it the 1.8 and 3.0, well, let me back up. The way it is currently, with
We're
the
adding
2.7, we're at 11.28.
Right.
If we were to increase the 2.7 to 3.0, you'd be at 11.18.
Right, so here's the thing, right? We had $7 million, which means you're taking 4.5 million of it. You're specifically saying take 1.8 of the 4.5 and put it directly for the fill pile, right? 800,000 that can be spent because it's going to the capital non-recurring, $1 million that's going to debt service. Then we're taking another 2.7 here. We're throwing that into debt service and saying, in case we need that for the fill pile or what have you, but specifically
Yeah, or
because we don't-
paving or future tax rate mitigation, whatever.
whatever, but right now the most pressing and unknown need is the fill pile,
Yes, sir.
right?
Mhm.
So we take the 2.7 with 1.8, that means we're putting $4.5 million aside, of which only 800,000 of that 4.5 million can be spent without coming back before this body. And then you're turning around and you're saying, of the 7 million, we've just allocated 4.5, and we're allowing 2.5 to flow through directly to fund balance.
Right, which
And by
increased,
flowing through directly to fund balance, we're increasing our fund balance as a percentage of the budget to over 11.2%. Is that correct?
it's all correct.
Okay. Questions, comments? Yeah. Mr. Matola?
Can I ask a question, Mr. Carey, since?
Absolutely.
Did you get the, I thought at our last
Bids.
meeting we go, did you get
Yes.
the cost for, is it Gould Manor? Is
Yep,
that what
I
is it?
did, and basically I pumped them into my spreadsheet. They were a little higher than I was anticipating, but not too bad. So Gould Manor, the remediation costs are $119,500. 119,500. So
And have they started the work there yet?
Oh, so I met
So
with
that's
the,
estimated, or
that's estimated. It's basically
Estimated.
per ton rate.
400
So-
tons, right?
Yep, so there's $220 for transport and disposal, which was a little high. I was carrying 180, but I will say we had 6 bidders, and the spread between the bids was 168,000 for the high bid, or I'm sorry, $220,000 for the high bid, and the low bid was $119,000. I met and then the rest of the bids were within a couple thousand dollars.
Does that include new fill to
That's
replace what's
correct.
been?
Yep, and we've already asked the question. We need analytical on the new fill.
What is that's a huge disparity.
Some of the other, so this is the thing, when you bid out the remediation projects, we try to do it as simply as possible, and that those contractors in their transport and disposal number, which is the bulk of the cost, they have to figure in labor, excavation, trucks, so there is a pretty big swing there. The company that actually did the low bid, they haul a lot of waste in Connecticut, Red Technologies, and we met with them this morning to go over timeframes, basically execution of performance bond, all of those things before we can issue purchase order and get the work started.
Ryan, do
Yep.
we get like bills of lading or where that stuff went
Yep.
to? And
So-
certifications of that?
Yeah, so there's different levels of manifest, because it's asbestos will be put on a certified manifest. We make sure that that goes cradle to grave, meaning that Red Technology has a transfer station in the state of Connecticut that's certified through EPA and DEP. It will actually go there, and then they'll transfer it up to the final disposal site, which is Minerva up in New York State, up near Niagara, which is where most of this type of waste will go.
Okay. And when they do this remediation, do they have to like do the sidewalk itself?
No, so the material under the sidewalk won't be ripped up because that's considered a protective barrier in itself. So they will dig up, there's boring locations, and they'll be working under the oversight of the LEP, who will actually be taking the samples as they're doing the work. And they'll be covering the area with filter fabric. After it's excavated, samples will be collected, and then prior to backfilling, we'll have to wait for the laboratory analytical that will come back and say, yes, it's okay to backfill, and then we'll backfill and stabilize it. So they're talking about 7 to 10 days to complete the Gould Manor part of the project.
Okay. The next time that sidewalk has to be replaced and it's uncovered, will that material underneath
Yes.
there have to be remediated?
Possibly.
I would imagine it's exposed, right?
You could put that, yes,
Okay, so someone's gonna have to keep track of this, that we're gonna have to do that.
correct. But we have data, we didn't want to drill through the sidewalk because it's a protective barrier. And then basically drill through it. Now you just compromise the integrity of the sidewalk. So, yeah, when and if that sidewalk is replaced, we'd have to carry a number for the remediation. But it's not any more protective to go out there and rip up the sidewalk and endure that additional cost at this point.
Do we have any other remediation costs for any of the other areas yet?
So I'm discussing those additional costs with them because the material itself is what generates the cost. So Burroughs Park, there's one small area in front of the goal. We've already talked to them. I actually shuttled them around to some of the other sites, the idea being that I'd like to keep them working once they're mobilized, because the mobilization cost will be down. If I can tell them to go from Gould Manor to Burroughs or however we do it, that will keep that mobilization cost down, which in the bid was actually large number. Again, it was $7,500 for mobilization, but those costs ranged anywhere from, 50, the high bid was $85,000 for mobilization to the low bid of $7,500. So you could see.
But do you have costs on all the other remediations?
So I'm only been able to plug in their TD, their transport and disposal number into a spreadsheet that I've populated based on estimated tonnage at the other sites. So yes, I do have some idea of costs associated with that.
What do you got on those so far?
So again, I'm having the
I know they're
time
not final.
bond, check the math, but for all the remediation sites, the way it sits now is about $19,000. But some of those may not need remediation. We need to sit down and really look at the numbers.
719K.
Yes,
Okay, and that's the remediation, that's not the testing.
it's just remediation. of the
Right,
material.
so that, bear with me for a minute. We've got like $1 million that's been spent on the litigation and the pile and all that kind of stuff. We've got rough number 350,000 that's been spent on, or will be spent on testing the 60 locations, right?
I think that's about 300,000 so
It was,
far.
it was over that. When we,
Like 339.
yeah, it was close to 350.
359, 298.
359.
359, 298. I won. I was close. That's for testing. Then you got 719,000 on remediation. Now, I know, Brian, I'm not gonna, right? So the total cost here we're looking at right now on that is $2 million. And that is, the legal stuff is not done. We don't know what's gonna come out of the rest of the remediation. We don't know whether there's other places to be tested. But on the other side of the ledger, we don't know whether the 719 is high,
It's conservative.
conservative. So right now, we're looking at $2 million, right? Now, we've already spent $1 million that already came out of other funds. So right now, we've put $1.8 million up. And that looks like it's going to go against the other million, the second million right now, right, Mr. Mayor?
The 1.8 million covers the 356K that we've already spent on the testing, and the estimated cost of the current remediation done conservatively,
Right,
as
so it's $1
Mr.
million
Lane
bucks.
said, plus an extrapolation to the other 20 sites or so that are being tested, and with potential remediation there.
Right, so it's 1.8 against $1 million more detailed estimate right now. The other 900, which is close to $1 million, that's already been taken care of out of other funds. So it's a $2 million problem right now that we know of, right? Estimate.
So right now, for all the costs associated with this, plus my estimates of remediation, it's about 1.3 million.
1.3, so what am I missing?
You're also including, I believe, the legal costs.
No, but that legal cost, I think that was,
So the 1.3 is just what we know now, and the dollars now. Doesn't include, it doesn't, the 1.8 is what we know now, plus the testing of the other 21, plus potential remediation of the other 21.
all right, so the 2 million number is coming out to be the number right now. That's best estimate right now is $2 million, right? And that doesn't include future legal fees, depending on what that is. I'll come right to you, John. Right?
Correct. Very conservative number, Mr. Curran, I think.
We hope it's a conservative number, unless you
Exactly.
got your engineering degree or your environmental degree,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I didn't even sleep at Howard Inn or
Right.
Holiday Inn or whatever.
Right. Go ahead, Mr.
I
Mattoli.
don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but is there, especially since the figure that Brian's given us is really conservative, it would be nice to have this on a nice piece of paper, spreadsheet.
Sure.
all This information, knowing that it could change.
Mr.
that's
Mayor,
all.
can you put something together on that?
Will do.
Thank you.
And I agree, look, he said it's conservative and all that, but last week it was 100,000, now it's 119,000, so we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. Sure. All right, so the transfers are now before us. We know what it does. We know what the approval process is. We know what it puts aside. We know what it does to fund balance. It gets us where we need to be with fund balance. It gives us cushion for additional expenditures or what have you related to this or other items. Any questions, comments, or concerns? If not, I'm going to put the additional proposed funds transfer for fiscal year 19 general fund as laid out on this schedule before us. Do I have a second to that motion? Can I take Mr. DeWitt? The item is before us. I'm going to call this for a vote. Anybody? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. We look forward to future updates. We want a full accounting on this. Mr. Carey, thank you very much on that one. I think you're here for one other item, right?
Number 6.
All right. Can we, can I take it out of order and go to number 6 to get this so Mr. Carey can move along his way?
Much appreciated.
Okay, so I'm going to call item number 6 to hear and report on a solid waste and recycling department compactor issue. Can you step us through this? This is again a holdover item from the meeting of the other day.
Yeah, so I had Mr. Ed Bowman prepare this. I think you guys got a copy of it. It's a 3-page summary. So I wasn't too far off on what I was telling you last week, but the timeline is basically laid out here. They had an issue with the compactors. They were basically trying to put bandage on them for a couple of years, and then in June of 2018, they basically had one fail and then another total failure of one. I believe from what I'm told, they put together an emergency declaration for both compactors. They went out to bid, or they purchased them from a sole source provider, is what I'm told. Basically, the compactors were having issues handling the load because they were a little bit smaller. And then in December of 2018, I guess that's when it really became an issue because they stopped taking the recycling in Stratford, so we were left to have to handle that additional waste stream at the transfer station. So they were already having a little bit of trouble, but with that extra workload, it required them to work overtime in order to basically get the additional waste out of the facility. So that's where the overage from the overtime was coming in, because now they do have to work longer hours to get the same amount of work done. Basically, they went back to the vendor and they told them that it's not working, and they're at the point where they need to upsize the compactors to basically deal with the new volume of the waste stream. That's the 10,000-foot view of the issue. So we are working on getting something out to bid. I've instructed them to basically work with the Solid Waste Recycling Commission before we move this ahead. The question of where we're paying for it is something we need to work on.
Okay, so let me see if I can summarize that just so that I can see if I have the understanding. All right. Originally in the waterfall schedule, which we use for capital planning purposes, 3-4 years ago, there was $400,000 put in that waterfall schedule related to new compactors because our compactors were 40 years old plus. Fair statement, Mr. Mayor?
I don't recall the numbers that were in there, but
Okay, that's what
yeah.
this says.
Yeah.
You handed it to us. Is this yours or somebody else's?
This was prepared by,
Okay.
Public Works.
So Public Works is saying that they had $400,000 in there. That later became $200,000 that later was taken out of the waterfall schedule as a whole by the time, it doesn't have dates, but I'm going to assume by the time 2017, 2018 rolled around, right?
According to this, I have to fact check it, but yes.
Okay, so we had nothing in our capital waterfall by the time decisions were made. In 2017, 2018, they started to experience real problems with the old compactors. They started to fail.
That's
right?
correct.
So they did an emergency, within their own budget, they did some emergency finagling and loosened up the funds, which to me, I can't figure out how much it exactly was. Looks like it was $110,000 or so to buy 2 contractors by a single source.
My recollection is like $54,128 or something like that
Each.
for each.
Correct.
Right. So this was a single source provider. We went out and they said, oh, yeah, you got to buy them from us. This is what we do. Yes, it'll handle your capacity. No problems. Same thing you already have. Fine.
Smaller but more efficient.
Smaller but more efficient. Right.
Correct.
Same capacity. Right.
The transfer stations, all of the ones that have been built you basically have to finagle the new compactors in there. You know, when they built them in the 70s, they were basically built around the compactor. You take that out, you got to reconfigure the building to some point.
Right.
And, you know, it's not a nice, got to shoehorn it in. It's my understanding. And that has created some problems. It goes down the chute, doesn't land in there, someone's got to throw it in there.
So don't. So then what happens is we put the new compactors in. Number one, we are having operational issue and capacity issues with the new compactors. Didn't do what the vendor had indicated it would do, and it's causing all sorts of issues. This is causing us to spend $13,000 more a month in operating costs down there. In addition, at the same time, some of our vendors have changed the way they're doing business and are recycling vendors, and they're sending us more stuff. So,
That's correct.
so your tonnage is increased, so the capacity was too low to begin with. It's now extremely too low. That's adding to the $13,000 a month operating
It's
cost.
a bit of a perfect storm.
Right. So now what's happening is you're going back and saying we need bigger compactors to handle the volume to lower our operating costs on a monthly basis, as well as service what's becoming an increasing issue due to what's going on in China and everywhere else related to recycling. Am I got it right
That is-
so far?
You have got it straight, yes.
I think there's one other issue which there was a change in, and I don't know this well enough to speak really well on the subject, but there was a change in what people could bring to us because it couldn't be taken.
So one of the issues is a lot of the recycling is contaminants, not like contaminants, pollutants.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
read that
someone
in
throws a
here.
pizza box in the recycling. Now they got to sort that out, and
Right.
it's, for single stream recycling, it's a huge issue.
I've probably been guilty of that. 'cause I can
Everyone's
never
been guilty of
remember
it, but
that, yeah.
it becomes a huge issue, and that's
Right.
had ripple effects of why they've stopped taking this kind of waste stream. So, you know, they were rushing to go out to bid on this.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
said, listen, we can absorb a little bit of time to make sure we get this right.
Okay, so now the question I have is several questions. Number one, are we out to bid on the new contractors yet, new
Either up
compactors yet?
or going up.
Okay. Are we going, is this going to be an open bid process? Or are we
Yes.
back to this single
bid.
source? Okay. So we're not going to go with the same vendor who said, we may, they're probably in the mix, but we're not unilaterally going with the same vendor who said,
Competitive bid.
this is work. Was it truly last time a single source, or was that?
I think it was single source and emergency, so there's not a lot of people who sell these compactors.
Who
in
gets to
general.
determine if it's an emergency?
I don't know that question. I mean, in this
Is that the
position now,
purchasing
I would
authority?
say at this point,
Yeah.
me and Bob and purchasing agent.
Usually purchasing, and in my world where I work, it's
Yeah.
up to purchasing to sign off on, this is a single source, it's an emergency. They have to look at everything and say yay or nay to it.
In my experience, you have 2 compactors, both of them go belly up. You've got garbage piling up. That's emergency.
Yeah, and that's what happened in this instance,
That's
or was
correct.
close to happening? All right, so they went with the single source, they did this. Now, you're going out for an open bid. You might go out and buy these compactors from somebody else.
We're looking
Right.
for a credit.
That's my question. How are you going to get a credit from the guys we bought this from if you go buy it from somebody else, Mr. Mayor?
we're going to, well, we're going out to bid, because it's,
Understand.
and we're going to hope to get this resolved within the month. And during that bid process and with the discussions, we hope that the fact that we have these that we don't need, we can somehow use, replace, sell, may be able to help the bid with the current, with this, it's a Marathon, with this vendor. So we're
So you're
we're
not,
going to do our best.
so this isn't a credit, this could be a trade-in.
Yes. Yeah, it could be a sale, credit, trade, yeah. I'm going to be on top of this.
We have no other use for these compactors.
Not that's been brought to my attention.
No.
I'll go to Ms. Desmond, then I'm going to come to Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. I mean, because of some malfunctioning, is there any recovering of funds? Is there a warranty on these items?
I don't know if it would be a warranty item, just because it's not meeting if it broke or blew up or stopped functioning. I think it's a performance issue, but we'll have to check on that.
Before, when they bought these, it's my understanding that the single stream recyclable was not allowed. So that's one of the reasons why the compactors aren't working, because the load increased.
Yeah, so they were
It's a
working.
contributing factor.
Yeah.
They weren't working, they were sufficient, and then the tonnage went up because of the recycling market went sideways,
Yeah.
and now we had an issue where we were,
Right.
chugging along, and
So if that change hadn't taken place, these might have been quite adequate.
Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. This is a great overview. It actually says that supposedly the new ones should handle the current capacity plus 33% more. So even though it's broken out very specifically that in December we had to take more recycling than we had, right? It is 33% more capacity, so you would think that was there. But then there's another list, and I don't know who generated this list, but the bottom line says, if we can't use these compactors as promised by sanitary equipment, I will be looking for a credit towards new compactors. But that's only if, the way I read it, only if we buy new ones from sanitary, right?
that,
So
correct.
if they're going to bid on this, it would behoove them to come in with a credit deal on top of the sale, right?
Correct.
And they have that option to do that?
Yes.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah, then, Ms. Marmon?
Thank you. So, in the document on the first page, it says, moreover, the station itself needs an upgrade. So could you explain to us what that means? If we get the bigger compactors, is it going to work with the station? Do we need to what is the station? And then secondly, if we get bigger compactors, do we have the room for them? I mean, do we have to, as you mentioned earlier, reconfigure the space to fit these new compactors? Is there, I'm assuming, a cost, a significant cost, insignificant cost associated with that?
So the way we handled this is that Westport, either last year or 2 years ago, had similar issues. And, I've been working with Ed Bowman on this, and I basically told Ed to go down to Westport and look at their files. And then the biggest concern was making sure that the new compactors would work with our electrical systems, because they're much larger, and we just need to make sure that everything synced up. So that's been done. But the long range, there's capital improvements that need to be done at the transfer station. It's missing doors, needs a new roof. So they were looking at putting together a facility plan, also to look at how the facilities operate on a daily basis, loaded, because there's some things that are becoming an issue with just even the neighbors. Before, they used to stage all of the Enviro trucks over at the back by Veers Park. Now the neighbors, especially in the summer, call and complain, so we're staging them out on, Richard Wright Way. So there's some things that they need to be looked at, because the amount of volume has gone up over the years.
So I just want to say I was asked by somebody who just texted me if you could speak into the microphone. I don't know if they can hear you. Sorry about that. But so just how quickly are we going to put together, because I mean, obviously we get the bigger compactors and they
Correct.
need to work and fit. So how quickly do you foresee putting together that kind of a plan and a budget, et cetera?
So I would say that, I've talked to Ed Bowman about that. I think they really need to go back to the Solid Waste and Recycling Board and kind of task them with doing that and I know they have quotes, and Joe Michelangelo was working on, getting getting proposals from engineers to kind of look at the functions of the transfer station and repairs. So I don't know where that is in process. It's something that could be done pretty quickly. It's just the funding.
So I guess my question is this an emergency in your mind? I mean, can we do one without the other?
It's not going to cause an issue overnight, but it is something that should be on the radar for sure, yeah.
All right, there's no vote on this item. This was
That's
just a
another question.
discussion, and we can have one more question, then we're going to close it up.
And I guess it's for any town officials in the room. Is there any thought about bringing a lawsuit against the sanitary equipment versus their consulting on this?
That hasn't been discussed on my end with them,
Okay.
but,
We're having, when I say we, Gerald and I are having a meeting tomorrow regarding this whole subject matter, because the bids are getting ready to go out. The bids are in, so we're discussing all avenues.
Do me a favor, after you get the bids and you determine next steps, come report back to the board and let us know what's going on.
Will do.
Its entirety. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anything else? Seeing none, we're done with this item. Thank you. We're going to go on to item number 40, hear a report on, the next two items should be pretty quick. To hear a report on the building department revenue budget as of fiscal year 2020. This was a discussion, in our discussion last week. We were ahead on 2019 on building department revenue because stuff was pulled forward. And we didn't know whether that was going to leave a hole in the 2020 budget. So can you let us know, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, revenues through yesterday, or
Yep.
for the year, $881,000. Was 1/3 of the budgeted amount and 25% of the year. So that's the first piece of positive news. And discussing this with Mr. Conley and going through what he is aware of, he's very confident, and it makes sense that we'll be okay to meet our budget.
Thank you,
That there's
Mr.
no
Mayor.
issue here.
Okay. We'll go to, if there's no other questions on that, we'll go to item number 5, is to hear a report on current vacancies. We had a large savings in personnel in last fiscal year. There was some talk about positions being held open at the beginning of the fiscal year of last year due to some questions as to what we were going to get from the state. It was represented that at present there are no positions being intentionally held open. When we met last week, the first was a question on that, and the second one was what positions do we have open around the town. Mr. Mayor has provided a listing. Mr. Mayor, why don't you just step us through
Yeah,
what you found out?
there's a few more names on this, or not names, but positions on this that I thought when we met last, because of some resignations I wasn't aware of, and some positions I knew offers were out that I thought had been taken. For example, the police officer, officers, well, let's start at the top, I'm sorry. So we all knew about the Director of Public Works and the Superintendent. We're also, we have 3 AEOs. We're putting those on hold. So the new director will have an opportunity to be involved in hiring the superintendent.
What is an
And
AEO?
It's an equipment operator. I'm not sure what the A stands for, but heavy-duty equipment. Police officers, there was 2 offers that went out. I kind of, in my mind, I deem these as, at least the first one is filled. The guy is accepted the position. Effective start rate is November 13th because the new academy is November 15th. I thought both had been accepted, actually, but the second one, the person we made the offer to rejected it. our list has been exhausted, so we're going to have a new test. The ECC, I was aware of one opening there, but there were 2 recent resignations. There is a regional hiring exam, and so there's a regional list that we hire from. So we're in the process of evaluating that, and people, we tell the region that we have the openings, the region sends out, and people who are interested in coming to Fairfield respond, and that's how that process works. The building inspector has been a tough one. Mr. Conley's been looking for someone there for a few months now. We may need to post that again. Or we may need to bring someone in at a step 2 instead of a step 1. It's Mr. Walsh.
Question on that. So the offer was made and rejected due to salary. Are we competitive on that? Because I'll tell you, with the amount of volume of work going through that department, we should be overly competitive on that, and especially with the numbers you're talking about tonight, where we are in our numbers. You got to pay people, for specialties. So I guess we shouldn't be losing out on salaries based on the volume of work coming in from these universities. It seems to be going to be going on for the
we're
future.
Theoretically, you're supposed to come in at step 1 unless you have different qualifications, certifications.
We're losing revenue because we don't have enough
We're not
bodies.
losing revenue, but the guys are working really hard. And he just really hasn't found the candidate he wants that he's willing to pay the money to.
Are we losing this
But
over like
the answer is
$10,000
we are
or something like that?
I'm sorry, what?
Are we losing this over like $10,000?
I'm not going to say for certain, but
Okay.
I'm thinking that if we up the salary by $10,000, we would have a more successful effort.
Every place, even corporations I worked before I was a lawyer, the money goes to where the money that goes out in budgets goes to the departments that are making the money.
No, I spoke with Tom about this a week and a half ago.
Not me, Tom Conley.
Thank you, yes, sir. And went through where he was. He had a couple more people he wanted to interview, and we're going to meet again, either the end of this week or early next week, depending on how well because they are pretty busy down there, and determine the next steps.
I will, Mr. Mayor, I will say just anecdotally, the reason I asked, are we losing money on this? And it's very anecdotal, right? And a couple of my colleagues here on the board were with me. We went into a local establishment one evening after one of these meetings. And the manager was there, and we said, "Oh my God, it took you so long to open. What took you so long?" And the person had no idea who we were, no clue, and just said, "Man, getting the inspections and getting through the town was really difficult. It really slowed us up." So I think we are being impacted by this, to be honest with you. This person there was no political acts, and that's not a political statement.
Well, no, I understand what you're saying. I guess when I say no revenue, it doesn't stop projects from being done, but it does delay.
Right, which
Yes.
costs them more money, which costs the
It
establishments,
impacts
the
your
commercial
impacts
establishments.
impacts
more
your
money.
cash flow. Yes.
Yeah, and it also impacts not just commercial, but residential as well. So I'm with Mr. Walsh. That's a revenue-generating area.
Yeah. Well, I'll certainly take these thoughts in. We're trying to be aggressive. We just haven't been aggressive enough.
Well, you also know, and I appreciate the fact you don't want to make a bad hire,
Yeah.
right? But if we're losing somebody, if you had a good hire and we're losing them over price, are we being penny-wise and pound
Yeah.
foolish?
Mr. Conley will be very happy when I share this conversation with him tomorrow.
No, and I also think that we've got to keep in mind that we don't have a pension anymore. So these people are going to other towns. And we always talked about this, that we might have to pay more because we're giving people a 401A versus a pension.
Correct.
So we're at a competitive disadvantage. And Bob, you're on the front line of that. You've told us about candidates that you can't get in here because they get, other offers. And I think we've got to be competitive on our salaries in order to get people under the circumstances we're
Right.
working under.
Thank you.
Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. I thought we were waiting to the end, but I want to go back to the ECC telecommunicators.
Yes, sir.
2, 3, and 4, does that mean there's 9 openings? Or is that a
No, no,
2
no.
turned
that's
into
just-
3 turned into 4? So there's 4 openings.
Thank you for asking that question, because
That-
it
that-
looked a little strange.
I
thought
was
we
like,
had
that's
9.
a lot of,
I was
that's like
I'm
all of
how,
them.
how many people do we have employed
That is, I did not catch that. That's, I did not type this myself, but
That's
no.
okay.
There's,
So-
there's 2 recent
Mhm.
resignations resulting in 3 openings. There was 1 opening prior that we were recruiting for.
So
I
3
don't know
total.
where that 2, 3, 4 came from.
Okay,
It's-
no problem. My real question is, these are the people that will, in theory, be moving to our regionalized.
Correct.
With Westport location at Sacred Heart, I think, right? Anything to do with that regionalization, these?
No, we had,
or-
we hired 2 people, one of which didn't quite cut it, and the other one just didn't quite like it.
Okay, because I was going to say, in the grand scheme of this regionalization, even the Westport employees become Fairfield employees.
That is a correct
at the end of the
statement.
day.
Yeah,
So we
I
should
mean-
be adding people more than
Yeah,
losing.
yeah, because the Westport, some of the Westport half mans their ECC with officers. So we'll be hiring more as well.
Right.
Plus working with the police department and EC department, they don't want to ever have to, don't want to put it that way. It's optimal to only have to train 2 people at a time, no more than 2 people at a time.
Got it.
So we're looking to do it in sets of
So-
2s.
So will those 3 openings cover us for this new regionalization?
Yeah, we have we can't be certain who's going to come over from Westport.
Okay.
But that's part of our thinking and it's part of the plan.
Got it, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Bob, would you say or do you know if the police candidate was also about salary?
I don't know, I think he took a job with a different department, but I don't know the reasons.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So Bob, in looking at this, with the exception at DPW, where obviously we have the unfortunate incident, we will refer to it as, and you're holding some positions open until leadership is fixed there, the rest of this really just looks like churn,
Yeah,
kind of normal churn, right?
yeah. I mean, the 2 recent ones in ECC were, we thought we had those hired, but didn't work. We had them hired, but they didn't work.
Right. Okay. Any other questions on the open positions? Seeing,
Just one comment. The numbers that we talked about transferring, they're, like the library, for example, the library gave back, I think it was $117,000 for openings, but yet we're only short 1 person. And I know some of it was moving.
That was last year and remember early last year when the library was closed for the
Yeah, I
roof
get it.
failing and,
Oh, I get it, okay.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess because I have no other officers here. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess and we'll be right back with the last couple items. All right, thank you. We have 2 last items, and I think this will be fairly quick, and I have a motion I'm going to make on one of them. Item number 7 is to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. We were going to get an update on the Board of Finance Audit Subcommittee, September 25th, 2019 special meeting. Unfortunately, the head of the Audit Subcommittee could not be here this evening. She got called away. We're going to have another meeting, I think, and I'd ask that we postpone this. Does anybody have a problem if we postpone this item to the next meeting? Do we have any other communications we should discuss this evening?
The board invited Mr. Lesser and Attorney Lesser and Mr. Hipson to this
Yeah.
meeting, and
So that brings
had
us into.
communications from them, which I've
Yeah.
furnished to the chair.
So thank you. So those, I have 2 letters here. We asked that, if you recall last week, we asked that Mr. Hipson and Mr. Lesser come before us to talk about the Julian legal issues and fill use issues. There's several lawsuits going on related to these issues, and we wanted an update on that from the town attorney. Not that, we've already spent how much in legal fees on this? Over $400,000, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood. So, and that's only on the civil side. So we want to know what's going on there. And we asked Mr. Hipson, because if you recall, at the special meeting we had, and Ms. Esmond and Mr. Walsh, you weren't able to be here last week, and this is one of the reasons we held this over. At the special meeting we had in late August, there was a question regarding who had seen what relative to police reports and information related to what was going on with the fill pile. And Mr. Tetro had commented at that meeting, and I'm just paraphrasing, I'm not quoting him directly, that he had had not any updates and that his administration had not had any updates before they found out about it when the arrest warrants were issued on August 2nd. Subsequent to that, Mr. Tetro sent me a note that I shared with all of you indicating that he had misspoken, and though he had not had any information, Mr. Hipson, in fact, had information from the police relative to the investigation, which was new information, which would have had the line of questioning that was at our August meeting. So we had asked Mr. Lesser to come back, and we'd asked Mr. Hipson, in light of the new information, to come back. You'll also recall Attorney Lesser could not be here for the August meeting because he was away. I think one of his children was getting married overseas at the time. So we've never had the opportunity since the news broke on the fill pile issue to hear from Mr. Lesser. And Mr. Hipson, who was at that meeting, did not say that he had met with the police that evening. So we wanted to give the board members the opportunity to follow up. So after issuing those requests, I received these two letters. Actually, Mr. Mayor received these two letters, forwarded them to me, and I forwarded them to the members of the board. The first one comes from Attorney Lesser, and it's dated Friday, September 27th. Bob gave me this on Monday of this week. Bob, as I informed you, I have a commitment for Tuesdays through at least the end of October. Although I was prepared to attend the meeting on the 25th, I will not be at the October 1st meeting, nor any meeting on a Tuesday evening. If the board is holding a meeting on another night of the week, which does not conflict with any other obligation, I will attend. Please pass this along to the appropriate persons. I was also informed that Stu and Ari, who I assume are the outside attorneys on the civil matter,
Correct.
are not available on the 1st, and I do not believe that they will be available on the 8th. All right. And then I got this Monday from Bob Mayer. This is from Emmett Hipson. And this is Bob. As we discussed Friday evening, I have a conflict this Tuesday evening. However, I want to ensure I provide you, as the clerk of the board and the Board of Finance, with the information that it is seeking. Section 8.3 of the Charter provides that the clerk of the board may call on, among others, town departments for such information as the clerk may reasonably require in connections with the duties of the clerk and responsibilities of the Board of Finance. I want to ensure that I comply with this and provide you with any information that you need, and to provide the Board of Finance with any information that it needs to perform its duties. In addition, if the board has any questions that it wants answered, please provide me with those questions, and I will make sure to respond with appropriate answers. Please advise Chairman Flynn that if he would like to have a conversation prior to the meeting, I'm happy to talk with him at his convenience. Thank you, Emmett Hipson, Esquire, Director of Human Resources. And that was dated on Monday, and I received that Monday afternoon from Mr. Mayor. So item number 8 on our agenda was to hear a status report from the town attorney and Julie on legal issues and fill use issues. You'll also note that Mr. Hipson does provide legal counsel to the town as well. He's paid as both Human Resources Director and providing legal counsel to the town. So neither of those gentlemen attended this evening. Mr. Lesser has made it clear that he's not available on Tuesday evenings. So since we cannot have this item this evening, and this is a holdover item from previous meetings, I'm going to request that we hold a special meeting specifically on this item, at which point we can also hear from the audit subcommittee on Monday, and I believe it's October 21st. That would be Monday evening, October 21st. So I'd like to tell everybody that I'm going to call a special meeting on that night, and I would like to hold over the audit subcommittee report as well as a discussion with the attorneys for that meeting on the 21st, in deference to Mr. Lesser's schedule for Tuesday evenings through the month of October. Anybody have a question or an issue, please?
I do, yes. I realize on at our special meeting on the 26th, I mean, we discussed a broad range of topics that don't
We did.
normally fall within our purview. So are you asking Mr. Hibson to come at this next meeting?
I will.
Now, will we be questioning him in any manner that would pertain to financial matters?
I would assume so, and it depends on what this board wants to ask. And if they ask other questions and he doesn't want to answer them, that's fine as well. But it's relative to the conversation, because that conversation got cut off short on the night of the, I believe it was August 25th, wasn't it?
25th.
Was that the night of the meeting? So, yeah. But that would be the intent. Yeah, Mrs. Marmy?
So I apologize, I was not at that meeting, but
Were you
I'm,
not there? I thought you were.
You were at the special meeting.
You were at the special meeting, I thought. Yes, you were at the special meeting.
late August, I wasn't here. Oh, no, it was after Labor Day. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay, regardless. So I am also, I'm not, I understand he plays dual roles, he's HR and he consults on legals, but I would be curious what kind of questions this board might have for him. He's asking us, he's saying, if the board has any questions that it wants answered, please provide me with those questions. So I would be curious what kind of questions we might have for him. Because I'm not clear why we were calling him. I don't recall talking about having him here.
Mr. Walsh, it was partly your question.
Yeah, I would say that just like any other witness that we get here for any other matter, I mean, technically, I guess, we could ask questions to every single person and not have anybody appear before us. But that's just not the way it works. We have a right to ask questions, and we have a right to everyone to hear that answer and maybe have a follow-up question. And I don't see what the problem is, just like any other witness. And I don't know exactly why Mr. Hibson's telling us what our roles are under the charter. We have a right to have him appear before us.
I'm not challenging
Yeah, no,
who we're asking to come before us. I'm just genuinely confused about what we
Well, he's also
want to
entered
ask
it,
him.
he's also, they're also.
And I'd like
enter-
to have a clearer idea of what the board, what the kind of questions, because I
Sure.
frankly
So-
don't feel, I'm
so
not
would-
sure what I want to ask him. So I'm curious
Sure.
what you want to ask him. That's,
Number one,
or
there'll
if
be-
you've thought about it, or what those
Number one, I'm
questions might
sure
be.
there'll be follow-ups from that meeting that night, right? That conversation got cut short, right? So there'll be follow-ups from that meeting that night. That was new information. Number two, there has since been terminations relative to people in this manner. I want to know what the expense is relative to those terminations, what our obligations are as the Human Resources Director. I also want to know what costs we can recoup, and I want to know what's the ongoing costs with these individuals and with this over-management and oversight that we're seeing with the fill pile, with Mr. Carey, and any other additional expenditures that we have relative to HR or legal matters on these items. And quite honestly, I don't know where Mr. Hibson has been relative to legal advice and legal counsel with these matters. Because I know he's come out and said he was in executive sessions with the Board of Selectmen on these matters. So what kind of counsel is he giving them relative to the legal matters on both the civil side and the criminal side, which we could even go into private executive session. I'm lax to do that, or I'm really concerned about going into private executive session, but should we so choose, I want to give this board the opportunity to do so. Yeah, Mr. Mottola.
So, the way I see it, I think we need to stay within our purview, and hopefully we'll all be able to do that. My concern is, depending on what answers I get from certain people, will determine how I may vote on future financial issues that affect our town. And I think that's how I'm kind of looking at it. And,
Sure. Without a doubt.
And we'll probably debate this in a couple of weeks, but I really think if that's the direction we want to go, we're going to have to go into executive session.
Well, see, the other thing is, remember, and this is a fair point, and we talked about this, I don't remember exactly who was on the board when that agreement with Mr. Hibson was made, but remember, Mr. Hibson does wear that dual role of HR and legal. legal. And I'm not sure under which hat he was wearing when he was in some of these
So
meetings.
I think that my understanding of his dual role was, from a legal standpoint, was to negotiate collective bargaining agreements with the various unions. So that's what you want to
Yeah.
ask him, that type of question. I suppose that's fine, so.
And why would you be, if that's the case, why would you be in private executive session over civil lawsuits and litigation?
Well, I would assume some of the executive sessions were talking about personnel issues, which you would go into executive
Well, if they
session.
were talking about personnel issues in January, how can the selectmen say they didn't know about it till August? If they didn't know there were personnel issues, there would have been no reason for the HR director to have been in private executive session with the Board of Selectmen 9 months before this became public. If they knew about personnel issues and didn't do anything, I don't know. So, anybody else? So, can you guys please mark your calendars? I don't think I need a vote to do this, but it's going to be October 21st at 7:30. Then we'll have to do it in a different location. No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Throw the RTM out.
There's an RTM meeting that night. Throw the
Mr. Mayor?
Sir.
When are you going to be able to get confirmation that Mr. Lesser and Mr. Hipson are going to be able to
I'm
attend
sure
on
it'll
the
be the
20th?
first thing. I'll probably send out a text tonight, actually.
Okay. All right, if it's not, Tom, are you going to send some other date out?
Let's see what comes back.
Okay.
All right?
I did send out an email to both parties thinking you guys might take this course of action, asking them for dates they were available. I did that late last night. But I didn't have a response by the end of the day today when I last checked my email.
Great.
Two other items, just one clarification. The total legal costs is about $150,000.
I think it was more than that.
Yeah. So I'm
We
just-
need to go, it's more than that.
No,
from
it's,
what I remember.
but anyway.
take a look.
Yeah, but the other
And thank you for
question that's
that.
outstanding that the board asked me was, did the town buy any fill during the Julian years from people other than Julian? And the answer is yes, $111,000 with Red Coach, and a company called Stone Construction, $74,000.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the follow-up, and I would like to see the legal stuff, so I appreciate that as well. Yeah, Mr. Mottola?
So, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Carey. At the last meeting, he indicated that he was getting close to determine, reviewing the DPW records, where some of the Julian fill might have been put throughout the town. So I don't know if he's finished that yet, but
Sorry, what? I was taking
Mr.
notes.
Carey said at our last meetings that he was
They were reviewing the
They were
invoice.
reviewing
Yeah.
that, they were able, he
John's
thought
right.
he was going to be able to determine what fill from the Julian pile was used throughout the town. And he thought by looking at the paperwork, what do you call it, the
Well,
invoices?
what we've been
whatever.
doing, yeah, no, the whole process actually that we started when, like August 6th or 7th, whenever
Right.
this thing came out, to identify fields is basically to go back to the invoices paid to Julian. So, and when we say field, I say fields all the time, but there's playscapes and there's
Right.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, so, yeah, so the 60 areas that have been tested were all based upon that. Then there's 21 more that we're going out to bid on testing for. The bid is out. I think 18 of those relate to connection with invoices, and 3 relate to people who have made comments that they think that there was fill there as well. So, does that answer your question?
Kind of. I thought he was still in the process of determining that. That's how I took what he said at the last meeting.
Basically, have they gone through every document from Julian and
Yeah.
understood where all the fill in
All the
town has gone?
invoices. Yes, sir.
Can we get a listing of that?
listing of all the.
Well, if somebody's gone through every invoice that
Yeah.
Julian gave us to see where all the fill went, then somebody's got a listing of where all the fill went.
Right.
And that'd be, and it should be based, it should reference which invoice it came from.
Right. I think that'll be a.
And I would imagine that every one of those places is being tested, no?
Yes. It's my understanding.
Mr. DeWitt?
So we're sure that there's an invoice for everything? Because there were credit memos, was any work done under credit memos that wasn't documented with an invoice?
No.
We don't know the answer to that.
No,
Is
no,
the
yeah,
answer,
no,
right?
no, we do. Basically, the credit memo thing is fairly straightforward.
If you issue a
It's
credit
good.
memo, there should still be an invoice.
Yeah. I mean, the credit memo
Don't get a
would be
credit
issued
memo
against
instead
the
of an
invoice.
In a normal corporation, I'd agree with you.
Well, no,
Oh,
but that's
no,
what
that's-
happened
that's-
here.
Does this happen here too?
Yeah,
Even though
yeah.
they just weren't good
They
credit
just
memos?
didn't go through the system.
Yeah, and we just didn't accept them. Basically, we audited, we didn't accept them, and we,
The credit
they
memos
paid.
themselves, the issuance of the credit memos were against policy. That's what it was. So
But they were
the-
detailed.
But they were,
But
yeah,
Yeah.
well, the invoice was detailed.
yeah. We,
Even though the
question-
credit, even though the
basically,
credit memos were out of policy,
The
we
bigger
believe
que-
that there was an invoice issued out of the policy. Oh, issued within policy is what I meant.
Well, yeah, I mean, there
But
was an
then-
invoice issued, there was a credit memo issued instead of a payment, which is wrong,
Okay, got it. Okay.
right? But the question is, to your earlier point, and it's a very good question, are we sure that all the distribution of the fill pile stuff was backed up and supported by an invoice, right? So to the extent the invoice listing is complete, will be complete, but to the extent that that's not complete, maybe it's not. Right? I mean, I think that's right. Does that make sense?
You said it a lot more eloquently than I did, yes,
Well,
thank you.
no,
That's what I meant. There was,
yeah. Right. All right. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote on adjournment. All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you. We'll take Mr. Mottola.